Hello, everybody. This is Joseph P. Farrell with news and views from the Nefarium on Thursday, December 3rd, 2015, a day after the sad shootings in San Bernardino, which we're going to be talking about today in a bit of wider context. And in that regard, I want to mention to the members of the website that Daniel and I just finished recording a new members dialogue in the members area. It should be up soon, in which we address at some length some of the topics I'm going to be raising in today's news and views. But they do concern kind of a wider context of things I think may be going on here. But I want to start out with the article that appeared in the Los Angeles Times regarding the San Bernardino shooting yesterday. The headline here is San Bernardino shooting suspect traveled to Saudi Arabia, was married, appeared to be living the American dream, co-workers say. I want to stop and have you ponder that headline for a moment and its implications, because clearly now a finger is being pointed at Saudi Arabia, and by stating that he was married, appeared to be living the American dream, it's creating the climate to suspect anybody who appears to be a Muslim that has ties to Saudi Arabia and appears to be living the American dream. And I'm mentioning all of this because for a few months now, in some of my blogs on some of the news and views, I've been suggesting that Saudi Arabia itself now is coming under increasing scrutiny from the West, from its normal allies, for its activities in supporting Islamic terrorism and extremism. And it is, of course, itself a barbaric and rather extreme regime, as most of us know. But I want to read a few things here from this article that kind of buttress the headline in the LA Times here. First, from the very beginning of the article, it says, as the holiday gathering got underway Wednesday morning, Syed Rizwan Farouk joined dozens of his colleagues from San Bernardino County's Public Health Department. Farouk, an inspector, seemed quiet during the early hours of the event, then vanished just as a group photo was about to be taken. Shortly afterward, gunfire erupted at the Inland Regional Center, where employees filled a conference room. By the end of the day, police had identified Farouk, age 28, as a suspect in the massacre and said he was one of two people shot to death in a gun battle with officers. The other was 27-year-old Tashfeen Malik, who a family member said was Farouk's wife. And now, skipping down a little bit in the article, they said that Farouk had recently traveled to Saudi Arabia and returned with a new wife he had met online. The couple had a baby and appeared to be living the American dream, said Patrick Bakari, a fellow health inspector who shared a cubicle with Farouk. Now, all of that is convenient, and it raises to my mind whether someone with a baby would be indeed involved in an activity like this, especially if they have a job, appear to be living the American dream. If there were not some sort of external pressure, perhaps even mind manipulation going on. But the bottom line here, folks, is whether or not this was some sort of false flag episode or a genuine act of domestic terror carried out by a radical Muslim cell in this country is now beside the point, because what is being done is the finger is now being pointed by the West at Saudi Arabia. And I've been saying for a few weeks now that it's my suspicion that Saudi Arabia is, so to speak, on the menu. And I think the Saudis know this. Now, the second article I want to talk about is related, but in a much, much wider context to that thesis. This is an article that appeared on Russia's English language news service, Sputnik News. And the headline here is rather amazing and different, and it suggests to me that yet another one of my suspicions might be actually corroborated in this instance. The headline from Sputnik is actually two headlines. The first headline says, German spies say Saudis shifting to more impulsive interventionist action. And then the sub headline here is, Germany's BND, that's the Bundesnachrichtendienst, the German equivalent of the CIA. Germany's BND Foreign Intelligence Agency warned that Saudi Arabia is becoming, quote, impulsive, unquote, in its foreign policy. And I want to read this entire article. It's very short to you. It says, in a memo published Wednesday, the agency, the BND, said that Deputy Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, who is second in line to the throne, and his father, King Salman, are trying to establish themselves as leaders of the Arab world, the Associated Press reported. Quote, thus far, the cautious diplomatic stance of the elder leaders in the royal family is being replaced by an impulsive interventionist policy, unquote, the BND said. Since King Salman succeeded to power in January, Saudi Arabia has intervened in Syria, Lebanon, Bahrain, Iraq, and Yemen. The moves, according to the BND, are meant to prove that, quote, Saudi Arabia is prepared to take unprecedented military, financial, and political risks to avoid falling behind in regional politics, unquote. Saudi Arabia has long viewed Iran as an aggressive and expansionary power and has considered Tehran's use of non-state proxies, such as Lebanon's Hezbollah and Iraqi Shiite militias, as destabilizing in the region, Reuters has reported. But under King Salman, it has moved more assertively to counter its regional foe. Prince Mohammed has been granted more authority since his father came to power. The BND said there is risk that the prince could get carried away while trying to secure his spot in the royal family succession, which saw him placed ahead of dozens of cousins. Mohammed could irritate other royal family members and the Saudi people with reforms while undermining relations with family allied nations in the region, the BND said, according to Reuters. Now, again, this to me is very significant because in the wake of the Paris attacks, what we've seen emerging and what I suggested in some blogs recently has been happening is French intelligence, you recall, is now sharing with Russian intelligence. And I blogged recently about the fact that this will probably mean that the German BND is involved in this intelligence sharing operation with France and Russia. And it's significant in that context to me, with everything else going on, that the BND is now naming Saudi Arabia as a destabilizing power in the region with increasing adventures. Now, the story is, of course, that Saudi Arabia is concerned about Iran, and that's true. But I think this is somewhat misleading because I think Saudi Arabia, being the principal example of what it is like to live in an unreconstructed Muslim nation is realizing that it either has to reform or it has to claim enough territory and power and leadership position to continue as it is, more or less, for the near future. In other words, it's a country under increasing scrutiny and assault, and it's lashing out. That's my basic view of the situation. But what's interesting here now is that you have the San Bernardino incident with all of the tragic death that has been associated with it. You had the Paris attacks, and again, the argument is no longer are these false flags or not. What is being fingered now is a center, a nerve center for these terrorist activities. And it's interesting that Germany's BND is now mentioning Saudi Arabia as being at the epicenter of a lot of this. So, what I suspect we're watching here, folks, is a long term adjustment of public perception to get people used to the idea that somehow, sooner or later, the West is going to completely change its relationship with Saudi Arabia. And as I put it, country simple, Saudi Arabia is on the menu. And this means ultimately, too, that Mr. Erdogan's Turkey, with all of what I've been calling its kind of revisionist automania, if you want to call it that, I think Turkey is ultimately going to be on the menu as well. There are going to be some domestic policy shifts inside Europe. I'm going to be blogging about that this coming week because these are already underway regarding the refugee crisis. So I think what all of this is presaging is that Europe is gradually moving away from the American position vis-a-vis Sunni radical Islamic terrorism. And that means either they're going to break with Washington, D.C., or Washington is going to have to change its policy in the region. And that may have been indicated in a small fashion by the LA Times headline fingering Farouk as a visitor to Saudi Arabia. This is a purely gratuitous piece of information as yet. There's nothing backing up any direct relationship between what happened in San Bernardino and any Saudi sponsored state terrorism. But the mere fact that they're fingering this and putting it boldly in the headlines suggests to me that there is now a perception, a change of perception, a long term one that's underway regarding the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. So this is one that we're going to have to watch and follow very carefully as the developments unfold regarding the San Bernardino shooting. It's significant to me that Germany is now directly taking aim at Saudi Arabia in its intelligence assessments. Now, this should come as no surprise because, as I've detailed in my most recent book, and for those of you who've been following Germany's trade relationships with the Middle East and particularly Iran, this should not come as a surprise. Germany and Iran conduct a lot of trade. Some of that has concerned its nuclear industry. There's, in addition to Russian technology involved, there's French and German as well. So I think we're going to be seeing now the possibility of the formation of a new power bloc that for the moment is going to be centered around the European powers, the Russian intervention in Syria, the inclusion of Iran for a short to mid-term in that power bloc. Whether or not they stay with this power bloc over the long term remains to be seen. But tensions heightening between Saudi Arabia and Iran, and now the Western powers are waking up to the long-term deleterious effects of alignment with Saudi Arabia. So the Saudis are going to be under tremendous pressure. I think they're going to lash out more. I think ultimately it's going to be completely ineffective, and eventually it may implode. At that point, I think you can see much more great power intervention in the region. So this is a story to watch. This is a trend I think we need to keep a very close eye on over the next few years. Anyway, that's it. My heart goes out to all the victims of the shooting there at San Bernardino, and again to the people in Paris that lost loved ones. Uh, and we want to keep a very close eye on these developments in the future. That's it for this week's news and views from the Nefarium. I'll see you on the flip side, everybody, and God bless.